In the golden glow of late-night television, Johnny Carson seemed untouchable, the smiling conductor of America's nightly laughter. For 3 decades, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson wasn't just a television program. It was a cultural ritual, a nightly communion where laughter soothed the edges of a turbulent world. But behind that curtain of charm, there were things Carson never said on air. Over the years, those who worked closest to him began to whisper about a curious habit, a private mental ledger he kept, a list of names, not enemies exactly, but rather those who had, in Carson's eyes, betrayed the sanctity of comedy. People whose public smiles hid private cruelty. As one longtime Tonight Show staffer put it, Johnny didn't rant or gossip, but once you were on that list, you were done. He'd never say it out loud. He'd just quietly close the door on you forever. This is the story of that list. The comedians Carson loved and then learned to loathe. The entertainers who made the world laugh, but left pain and resentment backstage. That if this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. 1. Jerry Lewis, the humanitarian with a dark edge. Jerry Lewis was comedy's restless genius, loud, inventive, and impossible to ignore. On stage, he was the king of slapstick. Off stage, the patron saint of charity, leading the muscular dystrophy telethon for decades and raising millions. But Johnny Carson saw another side. Behind the public generosity, there were stories that unsettled him. According to former Tonight Show staffers, Carson grew cold toward Lewis after several guests privately described his explosive temper, not on set, but toward crew members and assistants. Johnny hated hypocrisy. One producer recalled, he couldn't reconcile the man crying for sick children with the man who screamed at a stagehand for touching his coffee cup. Carson respected professional discipline, but what disturbed him was cruelty without cause. He once told a writer, "Comedy's supposed to make people feel lighter, not smaller." Lewis remained a fixture in show business, but Carson's admiration quietly vanished. After 1976, Jerry Lewis was never again booked as a primary guest on The Tonight Show. 2. Don Rickles, the insult king who went too far. Don Rickles made his living by crossing lines, a master of mockery whose insults could leave an audience breathless. On stage, it was all in good fun. Everyone was fair game, and his victims usually laughed along. But Carson saw the danger in that kind of comedy. What happens when cruelty becomes the joke? At first, the two men were friends. Rickles was a frequent guest, always good for a bit of chaos and laughter. But off-camera, tension brewed. A former Tonight Show floor manager recalled that Carson once stopped an interview mid-rehearsal after Rickles made a joke about a staff member's appearance. Johnny pulled him aside, not in front of the cameras, just quietly, and said, "There's a line, Don. Don't forget the line." Rickles shrugged it off, but the chill never quite thawed. Though the two would laugh together again on camera, the trust was gone. Carson didn't ban him. He simply never let the friendship return to what it once was. 3. Bill Cosby, the betrayal of the everyman. Bill Cosby represented everything Johnny Carson admired in a comedian: intelligence, charm, and control. When Cosby appeared on The Tonight Show in 1960s, he brought a calm, confident energy that audiences adored. But by the late 1980s, whispers reached Carson's circle. Allegations of predatory behavior, patterns of control, stories that contradicted the fatherly image Cosby sold to the world. Carson, who valued discretion and personal ethics above all, was appalled. A producer recalled Carson saying privately, "If any of that's true, it's not just a lie, it's a betrayal of every person who ever trusted his smile." From that moment, Cosby's name quietly disappeared from Carson's invitation lists. In later years, as accusations became public, those who remembered that quiet blacklist realized Carson had sensed the truth long before the rest of the world. 4. Chevy Chase, the comedian nobody could work with. When Saturday Night Live first aired in 1975, Chevy Chase became its breakout star, the new face of American comedy. Johnny Carson, ever watchful of the next generation, invited Chase onto The Tonight Show to see what all the fuss was about. What he found disturbed him. Several crew members recalled Chase's first visit as a nightmare. He allegedly snapped at camera operators and dismissed writers' suggestions with open contempt. One assistant described him as brilliant but cruel, like he thought decency was optional. Carson watched it unfold quietly. He didn't shout or lecture, he just observed. When the show ended, he thanked Chase politely and never booked him again. In a private conversation later, he reportedly said, "He'll be funny for 5 years, then he'll be alone." Decades later, Chase's reputation for difficult behavior became common knowledge in Hollywood. But for Carson, the verdict had been written long before. 5. Joan Rivers, the friend who broke his heart. Not every name on Carson's list was born of cruelty. Some came from betrayal. Joan Rivers wasn't just another guest, she was Johnny's protege. He gave her one of her first breaks, championed her voice, and even told interviewers she was the future of comedy. But in 1986, Rivers accepted a rival network's offer to host The Late Show starring Joan Rivers directly against The Tonight Show. And she didn't tell Johnny first. When Carson heard the news, he was devastated. He didn't yell. He didn't call. He simply hung up the phone and never spoke to her again. For the rest of his life, Rivers remained on the outside, looking in. Even after his death, The Tonight Show maintained the unspoken ban. She wasn't invited back until 2014. It wasn't hatred. It was heartbreak. And Carson never quite forgave the betrayal. 6. Milton Berle, the old guard and the ego clash. Before Carson, there was Milton Berle, Mr. Television. A pioneer, a legend. But by the time Carson inherited The Tonight Show, Berle's star had dimmed, and his ego had only grown larger. During one early guest appearance, Berle reportedly refused to follow production cues, overriding the director and improvising endlessly. Carson, who valued professionalism above celebrity entitlement, was furious. One crew member described the scene. Johnny was respectful. He knew Berle was a legend. But after that taping, he said, "Never again. Not on my show." To Carson, Berle represented an older generation unwilling to share the stage. The incident solidified his belief that comedy must evolve, and that ego, no matter how legendary, had no place in the process. 7. Red Fox, the talent Carson couldn't save. Red Fox was raw genius. His wit was fast, filthy, and fearless. Off camera, he was kind-hearted but impulsive, generous one day, explosive the next. Carson admired Fox's authenticity, but was troubled by his self-destruction. During one guest appearance in the 1970s, Fox arrived late, visibly angry, and demanded a complete script rewrite minutes before air. When the staff refused, Fox stormed off, leaving Carson scrambling for a replacement segment. He filled the time with calm professionalism, but behind the scenes, he was deeply disappointed. As one staff writer recalled, "Johnny never hated Red. He just pitted him. He saw a man drowning in his own brilliance." Fox's name wasn't erased in anger, it was crossed out in sorrow. 8. Buddy Hackett, the jester without restraint. Buddy Hackett was pure chaos, the kind of guest who could turn a quiet segment into absolute anarchy. Audiences loved him for it. But Carson loved order. During one 1970s taping, Hackett allegedly showed up intoxicated and made off-color jokes that left even Carson speechless. The episode never re-aired. Afterward, Carson told a producer, "You can be outrageous, but not careless. Careless isn't comedy." Hackett's wildness was legendary, but for Carson, it symbolized something deeper, the moment when showmanship became recklessness. 9. Bob Hope, the legend who overstayed his welcome. Few comedians were closer to the heart of American entertainment than Bob Hope. For decades, he was the face of patriotism and humor. But by the late 1980s, Carson's relationship with Hope had soured. Hope continued to appear on The Tonight Show, but his segments became difficult, scripted, mechanical, and often awkward. Hope's team insisted on pre-written jokes and refused to allow improvisation. Carson, who thrived on spontaneity, grew frustrated. In private, he confided to a friend, "Bob's not listening anymore. He's just reading cue cards. He never said it publicly, he was too respectful, but hope, too, found his way onto Carson's quiet blacklist, not for cruelty, but for refusing to evolve. 10. Johnny Carson himself, the final name. What few people realize is that Carson's list didn't end with other comedians. In a moment of self-reflection late in life, he admitted to friends that he, too, belonged on it. He was notoriously private, often distant, sometimes unkind to those closest to him. His 3 marriages ended in heartbreak. His perfectionism left many colleagues both awed and intimidated. As one friend recalled, Johnny judged himself by the same standards. He hated hypocrisy, even his own. In that sense, the list was never about revenge. It was about integrity, about holding comedy and himself to a moral standard few could truly meet. Johnny Carson never wrote that blacklist down. There was no document, no physical evidence, only stories and memories from those who worked closest to him. But what endures isn't the list itself. It's what it represented. Carson believed that comedy was sacred, that the ability to make people laugh carried an ethical weight. To him, cruelty wasn't just a character flaw. It was a betrayal of the craft. In a 1982 interview, when asked what makes great comedy, Carson said, quietly, "You have to love people to make them laugh. If you don't, the audience can feel it." Perhaps that was the core of his unspoken creed. The comedians who loved humanity, who found humor without humiliation, they stayed in his orbit. Those who didn't, who used laughter as a weapon, drifted away, one by one. In the end, Johnny Carson's blacklist wasn't a record of hatred. It was a mirror reflecting the truth that even in laughter, there are lines worth drawing. And maybe that's why, decades later, The Tonight Show under his reign still feels like a different world, a place where the curtain rose not just on jokes, but on a quiet kind of integrity. Because behind every laugh Carson shared, there was a conscience, and behind every name he erased, a lesson about what it really means to make people smile.